Every Wednesday night, for one glorious stretch of the San Fernando Valley, a 2.5-mile ribbon of asphalt turned into the most electric place in America for a teenager to be. It wasn't a concert. It wasn't a football game. It was just a boulevard. But if you were 16, 17, 18 years old in the 1970s or early 80s, and you lived anywhere near Los Angeles, you knew exactly what happened on Nuys Boulevard once the sun went down on a Wednesday. You didn't need an invitation. You didn't need a plan. You just needed a car, or a friend with one, and you needed to be there. It started, like a lot of great American traditions, almost by accident. Nuys Boulevard ran through the heart of the valley, past drive-ins and burger stands and the kind of wide-open storefronts that gave teenagers somewhere to point their headlights. Bob's Big Boy sat right in the middle of it all, glowing like a beacon, its parking lot slowly filling with premiered Camaros and cherry red Novas and old man sedans that some enterprising kid had turned into something with a little more soul. Word spread the way it always spread before anyone had a cell phone in their pocket. You heard about it from your older brother. You heard about it in the school parking lot. You heard about it because somebody's cousin drove down from Nuys and said you would not believe what's happening out there on a Wednesday night. And once you saw it for yourself, you understood. This wasn't just a bunch of cars driving in a loop. This was a stage. This was where you found out who you were, or at least who you wanted people to think you were, for one night a week. The boulevard became a slow-moving river of chrome and paint and rumbling engines, bumper to bumper for miles, moving at a crawl because moving fast wasn't the point. Being seen was the point. Every car had a story, whether it was a brand new muscle car some kid's father had reluctantly co-signed for, or a beat-up hand-me-down that had been lovingly, painstakingly turned into a rolling work of art with a paint job that took 6 months of after-school shifts to pay for. The sidewalks were just as packed as the street. Kids parked wherever they could find a spot, then leaned against their hoods or sat up on their trunks, just watching the parade go by, calling out to friends, sizing up strangers, waiting to see who might pull over and strike up a conversation. It was a meeting place before anyone used that word the way we use it today. If you wanted to find someone, you didn't call them, you just went to the boulevard and eventually, somehow, you'd cross paths. It had its own unspoken geography too. Certain parking lots belonged to certain crowds. Certain corners were where you'd find the lowriders with their hydraulics bouncing to the beat of a car stereo turned up as loud as the speakers could handle. Other stretches belonged to the muscle car kids, revving engines that had been rebuilt in driveways and garages all over the valley. There was room for everybody, as long as you understood which piece of the boulevard was yours for the night. What made it so magnetic wasn't really the cars, even though the cars were unforgettable. It was the freedom. Think about what it meant, back then, to be a teenager with nowhere in particular you had to be and no one checking in on you every 20 minutes. There was no group chat blowing up your phone. There was no parent tracking a little blue dot on a map. You told your mom you were going out with friends, and then the night was yours, wide open, full of possibility, and the only thing anchoring you to a schedule was the unspoken understanding that Wednesday night was cruising night and you did not want to miss it. That kind of independence feels almost unimaginable now, but for a whole generation of kids growing up in the valley, it was just Wednesday. Of course, it wasn't only about looking cool in a car, though that was certainly part of it. It was about community in a way that's hard to manufacture today. You'd see the same faces week after week. You'd watch relationships start with a glance out a rolled-down window and a shouted introduction over the sound of a V8 engine. You'd catch up with kids from rival high schools you'd never otherwise talked to, brought together by nothing more than a shared love of the boulevard on a Wednesday night. Friendships formed in gas station parking lots. Rivalries too. Sometimes, when two guys with matching pride and matching horsepower decided they needed to settle something a few blocks off the main strip, away from the crowds and away from the police cruisers that patrolled the edges of the scene, trying, usually without much success, to keep things from getting out of hand, because it wasn't all innocent nostalgia. As the crowds grew bigger, year after year, so did the headaches for the city. By the late 70s, some estimates put the number of teenagers cruising Nuys Boulevard on a busy Wednesday night at well over 100,000. Just try to picture that. A quiet suburban boulevard transformed, once a week, into something that looked more like a parade route in a major city, except there was no formal parade, no permits, no schedule, just teenagers, cars, and momentum that had been building for years. Businesses along the strip had mixed feelings. Some loved the traffic, quite literally, because a packed boulevard meant a packed burger stand and a packed gas station. Others dreaded it, worried about noise complaints, trash left behind, and the occasional fender bender that came from squeezing that many cars and that much teenage energy into one stretch of road. The city tried different things over the years to manage it. There were curfews. There were increased police patrols. Eventually, the pressure got heavy enough that officials began looking for ways to slow the whole thing down. worried that what had started as a fun, self-organized gathering had grown into something too big to control. And slowly, through a combination of stricter enforcement, changing tastes, and the simple passage of time, the scene that had defined Wednesday nights for an entire generation began to fade. The crowds thinned out through the 80s. The cars that had once lined the boulevard bumper to bumper started finding other places to go, or nowhere at all. By the time the 90s rolled around, Van Nuys Boulevard on a Wednesday night looked pretty much like any other boulevard on any other night. Quiet. Ordinary. A little bit sad, if you knew what it used to be. What's interesting, looking back now, is how much of that scene was made possible by things we simply don't have anymore. Gas was cheap enough that a teenager could fill up a tank and burn through it in one long night without thinking twice. Cars themselves were simpler, which meant they were easier to work on, easier to modify, easier to make your own with nothing more than a set of wrenches and a little patience learned from an uncle or a shop class teacher. And maybe most importantly, there was an entire culture built around the idea that being seen in public, cruising slowly past your peers, mattered. That your car said something about you, and that saying it out loud, in person, on a crowded boulevard, was worth getting dressed up for and driving across the valley on a Wednesday night. Try explaining Van Nuys Boulevard to a teenager today and you'll probably get a confused look. Why would you drive in a circle for hours? Why not just text everyone and figure out where to meet? But that's exactly what made it special. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't convenient. It required showing up, in person, with no guarantee of who you'd see or what would happen. It required a car with a personality, and a night with no plan beyond simply being there. For a few unforgettable years, that was enough to bring 100,000 kids together, week after week, on one ordinary boulevard in the San Fernando Valley. And for anyone who was there, riding low in the back seat of a friend's Chevy or perched on the hood of their own first car, watching the headlights stretch out into the distance, Wednesday night on Van Nuys Boulevard wasn't just a drive. It was the whole world, for one night a week, and nothing has quite replaced it since.